talk, and more talk. And we're going into Durban for another diatribe. And we shall go to Rio to celebrate Carnival. Not to celebrate the successes of negotiations in respect to climate change at all. We come from small island states, and I come from the Caribbean community, CARICOM, 15-member organization. And I can say to you that we are voiceless in respect to the negotiations, because even if we speak, we cannot be heard by the group of nations that are preventing progress in respect to the climate change discussions. And unless countries like the United States, unless countries like Japan, unless countries like Canada, unless countries in the BRICS come back to the table and discuss with all of us as one international body, it makes no sense going to Durban, and it will make no sense going to Rio. And that's a fundamental issue. What has happened is that we have fractionized the negotiations at the climate change table. And those of us who are the least contributors to climate change and the greatest, and those that are more affected by climate change, are not given an opportunity to be heard. My friend from UNEP is a public officer, and therefore he has to be careful what he says. I am a politician, and therefore I can speak in language of a politician. There has been a $30 billion commitment. The question is, how much of that money is actually in an account for the Maldives that is disappearing before our very eyes, the Seychelles, and all of us in the Caribbean to access today? This fast-track money. This is a slow-track facility rather than a fast-track facility. And I don't want us to believe that because there's a global crisis, this is the reason why the monies have not been put into account. We have wars going on, spending of billions of dollars in the middle of a global crisis. And climate change is a war in itself that we have to confront. But we can't confront it if when we go to the conferences, the President of the United States will come in via the back door and sign an agreement with Canada and Japan and head back to his plate without sitting around the table with the rest of us. So this is a fundamental issue. I believe I must give credence to the position of Australia and, in large extent, the European Union. And from a strategic standpoint, I believe small island states should partner with the European Union and Australia in order to get a voice at the discussions coming up in Durban if we make a progress. There's another facility of US $100 billion. Now, if we cannot raise $30 billion, how are we going to get $100 billion? And these two commitments in Cancun was in an effort to save face, because we all knew that Cancun was going to be a failure. And in order not to say it's a failure, why not give a commitment for monies that we know we will not be giving out anytime soon? And that's the issue. And I believe there has to be a greater seriousness. There has to be a greater sincerity on the part of all of us, developing, emerging, developed nations, to recognize that this is a serious crisis. Because you have the Arab Spring, you have the global economic crisis, you will have nations who will rise up against the governments because they will believe that the governments are powerless in addressing the fundamental issues of climate change. I am extremely concerned and disturbed by the lack of progress we made. And we, the citizens of the world, particularly those of us who come from, or those of you rather, who come from developed countries, you have to make that a political issue in your countries. Recognizing that you have a fundamental responsibility, because in large measure, and we understand the politics in your respective countries in respect to your commitment to reducing carbon emission and so forth. We understand that we cannot push you off the bridge. We understand we cannot push you off the edge, that there are some considerations, and I believe that we may have to give the China, the US, some breathing space in respect to the implementation of their commitments, because we cannot be unrealistic, because there are practical political issues in those countries. But on the same token, they cannot want to stay away from the discussion table by the fractionalization of the discussions. And there is going to be a challenge. What do we expect out of Durban? Besides going to a very wonderful country with a very illustrious history? Nothing. Nothing, nothing. The people who are going to benefit are the airlines and the hotels. The countries that have been affected by climate change will not see any benefit. I can tell you, my dear friends, that in our region, the issue of flooding was never a matter of concern to us. Now, with very little rain, our countries flood. We now have to build, in my country, Dominica, the Commonwealth of Dominica, we're now constructing sea defenses and river defenses throughout the country. And you can appreciate the tremendous cost of that capital investment. You have more frequency in terms of hurricanes, unduly prolonged dry spells, which affects agriculture, and unduly long spells of rain. And we have seen what used to be what we call the rainy season now becomes a dry season, and what used to be the dry season is now the rainy season. And all of these things have an impact on your economy. And if you're unable as a nation, as a group of nations, to provide for your people, then you will have a serious crisis on your hand. And the future of the people of this world will be on our hands and our consciences. And we have to speak out. And I agree with my friend that because of the global crisis, we have not been speaking about climate change. But this is a fundamental error we're making, not to keep climate change on the agenda. And the media has a responsibility also to keep it on the agenda. We have to keep our leaders on their toes in respect to the issue of climate change. It can't be about the EU having some crisis in terms of the debt, or the United States is in recession, or countries are reeling from the global effects of the world economy. This, in my view, is too important an issue and too serious an issue for us to not make it a topical point of discussion every single day. I am extremely, extremely worried, because I travel to many countries, small island states, and you see the kind of challenges. And you've seen the leader of Maldives, publicly screaming and crying for help, that his countries, his islands are disappearing before their very eyes. And how can we remain silent? How can we remain in an inactive manner, not committing the resources to address these issues? And money is not the issue, really, at the end of the day. It has to do with political will and political commitment. And that's what we're lacking. So at UNEP, at the UN, you have all the technical resources, and we can't hold you responsible because we give you directives and direction. You are basically there to implement. But we have not given you anything, really, substantive to implement. Nothing at all. And the script from Cancun will be the same script in Durban. Countries will tell you why they haven't given this money, and further commitments will be made to fast track and slow track the resources. I thank you very much for allowing me this time to make this intervention.
Thank you very much, and excuse me, Mr. Skerrit, for having been a little bit confused with your colleague from Grenada. We are going to, in a few minutes, we're going back to Grenada. But I was wondering, Mr. Kante, do you want to answer right now, or you want to wait before, because Okay, you'll answer later. So we're going now to Mr. Bonham Shin, again, Ambassador for Green Growth of South Korea, of the South Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs. I will give you the floor. Maybe it's interesting with you to tell us how do you finance your green growth, because first of all, South Korea is a fast-growing economy, and maybe the role, if you want to play a role in the international community, helping other countries to finance the growth, their green economy. You have the floor.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Attal. I would like focus on the practical you just mentioned. As we know, the first commitment period of Kyoto Protocol will end next year, but the climate change negotiation have not made substantial progress. As long as we expect others to change before making our own changes, no progress will be made. In order for the negotiation to reach a conclusion, I think an action-oriented, proactive attitude is really imperative. As for Korea, in 2009 at Copenhagen meeting, we pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30%, below the business as usual level by 2020, which was the highest level in the target range recommended for non-Annex I countries by the IPCC. The reason Korea announced the ambitious target is we see the climate change in a broad context of sustainable development. I would like to touch upon just the Korea situation, especially the energy areas. We import 97% of our total fuels, and 83% our energy mix is based on the fossil fuels. Korea is the 10th largest energy consumers and 9th largest CO2 emitters in 2010. And the last 15 years, our emission has been increased more than twice. Besides, our energy efficiency is just 71% of OECD average due to the large share of high energy consuming manufacturing sectors. At the same time, we know, the Koreans know, we cannot continue this kind of pattern of production and consumption. This is just unsustainable. We know the energy and resource scarcity. So 3 years ago, our President Lee Myung-bak announced green growth as our national agenda and as national visions to address these challenges and provide new paradigm of economic growth. I would not illustrate the domestic policy of the domestic side of green growth strategy, but we set up the institutional and legal framework to coordinate green growth strategy and policies. And also, we are now in the third year of 5-year green growth plan, which was started in 2009 and will be finished in 2013, in which we are investing 2% of GDP, doubling of UNEP recommendation, totaling about $90 billion toward the green growth project, including the governmental public investment, R&D areas. And on international side, we're gonna increase our ODA by 3 times by 2015, and also expand the share of the green ODA by twice by 2020. We already initiated the climate change cooperation with 10 ASEAN countries, investing $200 million from 2 years ago. And the most important thing is as a way to share our knowledge from our green growth experience with the developing countries and emerging countries, in 2010, we established Global Green Growth Institute with the headquarters in Seoul and regional office in Copenhagen and Abu Dhabi. The Global Green Growth Institute is a global think tank and act tank to provide strategies that promote sustained growth and environmental sustainability at the same time. As you know, the Secretary of United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, he emphasized there is a war between development and environmental sustainability. We should abolish the war as soon as possible. This is the most important task I think the humankind face in 21st century. So far, the 3GI conducted about 10 country programs, including UAE and Morocco and Lebanon in this region. And we're gonna convert this 3GI Institute to international organization by next year. Finally, I would like to touch upon the Rio Plus 20 process. As you know, the next June, we're gonna have a UN conference on sustainable development, and one of the topic is green economy. So we really expect at Rio, we want some tangible outcome, perhaps action plan, which is how to implement the green growth policies in worldwide that also guaranteed to address climate challenges. So the Korean government really believes the national government can be persuaded to shift from their own traditional brown growth of economic paradigm to a new economic paradigm of green growth, which Korean government has proposed. As a co-chair of the preparatory committee of UN Conference on Sustainable Development, Korea will its our best to promote green growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shin. And we are going now to your neighbor, Karl Hood, who is the Foreign Minister of Grenada. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting listening to the discussion so far. And I would like to, as I'm sitting here between Prime Minister Skerrit and my friend from Korea, to walk, as it were, in the middle of the both statement that were made just now. The problem that I've seen is that, and the fact that we must face, is that after almost 20 years of talk, the situation in our environment, in our world, is worse today than it was when the talks begun. And that we must face up. We must accept that, we must admit that. And the problem is that smaller countries like ours, island states, are facing the worst of the problem. And that's also a fact. I also want to address the seeming hypocrisy that is taking place in the talks, in that we talk around the issue, but never seem to want to address the real issue as to how to stop it, how to ensure that we can aim for and achieve a 2%. We've been asking for 1.5, but how can we even get there? Is it possible? I want to point out something that happened in Cancun that had me even more concerned. Taking part in the LCA Long-Term Cooperative Action Group and trying to help to negotiate a text, I was very surprised when I would hear countries saying to us that we need, and I quote, equitable access to atmospheric space. I don't know if you understand the impact of this statement. Equitable access to atmospheric space. To break it down, it means that they were asking for the very same access to pollute the atmosphere as the developed countries had in times past. And they were saying to us, they have developed, they have polluted, we need our share of atmospheric space so that we can develop. And I've had to ask the question, is it that the atmosphere is compartmentalized? Can you pollute your share of atmosphere without affecting our share of atmosphere? In your development, how do you save us from the problems that you are going to create? I do not think that we are sometimes very serious as we look at the growth and we look at the development. And the term sustainable development, if that has to mean anything, it must mean development in a way that the atmosphere, the world, can sustain it. And right now, it is not sustainable. The other problem that I've seen is that we cannot fault any country for wanting their citizens to develop. We cannot fault any nation at all for wanting to provide for their citizens. Because after all, as politicians, that's what we are called, that's what we are voted in to do. But on the other hand, how do we provide that? Do we provide that at any cost? Do we seek to provide that without looking at the long-term consequences? I think the problem here is that development is growing much faster than green technology is. So that as much as there is some development in green technology, the need for development is much greater than the transfer, as it were, of technology. And faced with development, especially in countries, in developing countries that need such development, and because there is not enough investment in green technology, because there is not enough investment, or not enough money to invest, as it were, then we find ourselves with a problem of development that is totally unsustainable. And this is what I call upon the international community to do. It is time that the private and public sector come together to face the issue of climate change. It is time that technology rise to the standard, to the height of the problems that we face. It is time that we begin to look critically at how technology can develop so as to help countries to develop without harming the atmosphere. Because if we don't do that, another meeting in Durban, another meeting in Rio, another meeting wherever you want to go would make no difference. It's time we face the real issue. And let me close by saying this. We are asked sometimes to adapt. And in Cancun, we spoke quite a lot about adaptation funds. May I say to us that there is going to come a time when countries would not be able to adapt anymore. It's a fact that, as I learned in science, if you take a frog and put a frog in a pot with water, the frog would not jump out. If you light a fire under that pot, the frog will adapt to the warming water and continue to adapt until it's cooked. Is that what you're asking us to do as small countries? Continue to adapt? Continue to adapt until you know more? That's the question I want to ask us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hood. That was very challenging. I will now give the floor to the third representative of the island countries we have here in this panel today. And it's Jean-Paul Adam, the Foreign Minister of Seychelles. And asking you again to try to stay by the 5 minutes convened.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And permettez-moi juste de dire comme c'est un plaisir d'être au Maroc. I will now revert to English as agreed in our panel. I would like to thank the interventions from all my colleagues, which I think have given us food for thought. And one of the key questions that our friend from the UN raised at the start was, is the infrastructure available for development, to deal with climate change? Is it sufficient? And I will associate myself with my two colleagues from the islands to say, no, it's not. Very short answer. As things stand today, we have a crisis of development. And we need to look at climate change and development together. We cannot divorce one from the other. I would like to point out that I think one of the biggest problems we have faced in all of the debates, whether it be from Copenhagen to Cancun, and I'm sure it will be the same in Durban, is that the debate about climate change and the debate about development have both become ideological debates. And this should not be the case. It should not be about ideology.